Thank you for the generous introductions with my colleague in the Department of Finance under the Secretary Del Campo. Let me flash the slide for you. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I was asked by FEF President Toti Chiquiamco to present the framework. I have often heard Professor, now Governor Medalla, use when he discusses policy choices of monetary authorities. Can we have the screen? There you go. The Mundell-Fleming policy trilemma, sometimes referred to as the impossible trinity. Quoting from Wikipedia, this model has been used to argue that an economy cannot simultaneously maintain a fixed exchange rate, free capital movement, and an independent monetary policy. An economy can only maintain two of the three at the same time, thus the impossible trinity. This is shown in the graph on the screen, borrowed from The Economist. For optimum macro stability from monetary authorities' perspective, you need the three legs: freely flowing capital in order to finance investments, fixed exchange rate for predictability of returns, and policy autonomy to give authorities freedom to adjust policy interest rates that will maximize output given inflation targets. But according to econ theory, the three cannot coexist at the same time, hence trilemma. When capital can freely come in and out, as in the case of the Philippines, either the exchange rate will have to adjust or authorities will be forced to take policy rate action, thus losing autonomy to keep the exchange rate fixed. What the BSP is now doing is a balancing act. Given fragile economic recovery, it does not want to completely lose autonomy by matching the outsized US Fed rate hikes. Hence, it is allowing the peso to depreciate. On the other hand, it does not also want the peso to depreciate too fast because it could feed negative sentiments and raise financial market stress, and or, in the current environment of imported inflation, lead to unanchored inflation expectations. So, as Governor Medalla said, if the exchange rate overshoots too much and it becomes too costly for the BSP to manage through direct dollar sales and or non-deliverable forwards, then it will have to raise interest rates more than it would have otherwise. To further situate where I see the Philippines in terms of managing inflation in the context of the impossible trinity, let me read what I said in response to a general question I was asked at a meeting a month ago. Number one, Philippine inflation at this time, and this was a month ago, is more cost push, coming primarily from the supply chain bottlenecks and more recent Putin war impact, especially on food and fuel. In contrast to the US and other countries that overly provided fiscal stimulus even when their economy was already on the upswing, our recovery is just beginning from the hard lockdowns that led to sharp contraction, 10% in our case. The 8% growth we saw last quarter represents only a 3% growth from the 2019 pre-pandemic GDP. Though it looks impressive, it's really due more to base effects and the non-recurring election spending. Number two, further evolution of our local inflation will depend primarily on what will happen in the Russia-Ukraine war, blockade and the sanctions impact on food and fuel prices. Also, the weather conditions in North America impacting on wheat, and to the extent that fertilizer usage dropped due to high prices, impacts on harvest coming planting season, especially on rice and corn. Its knock-on effects on meat prices as well. Also, any kind of possible food protectionism that we're now seeing. Parenthetically, our power situation also bears some watching with the end of the Malampaya contracts and the steady exhaustion of gas. Apart from the more expensive coal, thin reserves and shift to more expensive energy will push up our rates. Number three, To ensure that these supply side pressures do not translate to heightened inflationary expectations and demand side pressure, for example, through further wage demands, our BSP, like all other central banks, have taken some preemptive increase in policy rate and sweeping the monetary expansion they did during the past 2 years, but not lock in step with the US Fed so as not to risk our nascent recovery. The exercise of monetary autonomy referring to the trilemma. Also necessary to prevent excessive peso depreciation driven by capital flight as the interest rate differential versus the dollar assets narrow or possibly even turn adverse, which can also feed the local inflation. Deputy Governor Diwa Ginigundo will discuss the link between the FX rate and inflation, which surprisingly has been econometrically shown to be weak in greater depth in the context of an inflation targeting BSP. Number 4, the US Fed has lately taken strong action to arrest inflation with economic overheating, now raging in excess of 8% with their 75 basis points policy rate increase. This was last done in 1994 and signaling more to come. While this provides markets and the public comfort that decisive action will be taken to prevent runaway inflation in the United States and globally, this also raises the risk of a recession not just in the US but everywhere else. European output is already being directly affected by the Russia-Ukraine war, and China by its poor management of the COVID and a real estate bust problem. A global recession, number 5, a global recession will hurt the Philippines, but perhaps not so badly as other emerging markets. We are less dependent on exports versus our peers, and more on OFW remittances, which have been resilient in past economic slowdowns, and BPOs, which have also benefited from increased digitalization globally, accelerated by COVID. Our own estimates in global sources that OFW remittance will stay steady at about 4%, and BPO receipts will actually increase from 8 to 10% this year. Number 6, a silver lining to global slowdown could actually be lower inflation, especially in fuel. We may already be seeing it in oil futures and those of other commodities. There may also be some increase in the oil supply, a supply response, and also in other commodities. We may already be seeing some increase in oil supply taking place in response to higher prices and the US policy deprive Russia of a windfall. There's increase in shale production, use perhaps of the US strategic reserves, and suasion on swing producers, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. And finally, there's something I found out yesterday and possibly a ray of hope. Basic food like wheat is inelastic vis-a-vis recession, but there has been a recent downtrend adjustment in wheat prices. Apparently, the areas in Ukraine which produce wheat have not been so damaged by the war, and somehow is able to find its way to global markets through India and other land routes, despite the blockade. Also, the weather in North America has been more favorable than earlier expected. You'll see that graph. You can see that amazing spike in wheat prices, but look at the very sharp drop. Now, even with that drop, that's still elevated versus the long-term wheat price trend. But let me show you another graph which shows the prices of other commodities. Can you flash the previous one? There you go. I don't know if you can read this, but you can see the deep red numbers are those that have increased the highest. But you can see on the figures afterwards is that there has been some slight correction in many of them. So I guess this is all I have for now. Our next speaker, Deputy Governor Diwa, the real expert on BSP policy and practice, will answer a lot of your questions. Thank you. Thank you.